thank all of you for coming out tonight to acknowledge our elected officials and our community leaders. First of all, I'd like to introduce our county leader for the Democratic Party, Mr. Keith Wright.
Thank you, Giselle. Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
This evening is about information, and I want to thank Giselle Thompson for working so hard, but also I want to thank District Leader Corey Ortega. But this is about information, and our other clubs will be joining us if they're not here already. Certainly the Frederick Samuel Democratic Club, the Uptown Community Democratic Club, the Martin Luther King Democratic Club, and did I miss any? And well, West Harlem Independent. Yeah. Michelle Obama Democratic Club. All right. I just want to say thank you for joining us. I want to say
moving right along, we have some fabulous panelists here who we have invited, and we're glad they're with us today. They've been working really hard trying to bring the issues to us. Part of the reason why I wanted to bring this is so that we know both sides of the issues, the pros and the cons. So our panelists, first is Miss Minister Jazz and Mr. Al Benninghoff, the campaign manager for the New York Says Yes Coalition. As well, on the other side of the issue, we have Mr. Kyle Braggs, Secretary-Treasurer from BJ, and along with him is Mr. Jordan Marks, the campaign manager for New York's Against Corruption. We have two moderators this evening. Mr. Barry Weinberg, who's also the president of the West Harlem Progressive Democratic Club. And we have our other fabulous Janine Johnson, Esquire. She's with the President and she's also the law chair of the New York County Democratic Committee. I will now turn the mic over to Janine Johnson, so that she can give you some of the history and the background information on the proposal.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Hello. Hey. So, this should be a lively and spirited discussion. The Constitution is a living, breathing document, and it's something to really be excited about. So you're going to hear a lot of information tonight. The organizers have tried to present both sides to you, as you see before you. And so tonight's purpose is not to steer you in any direction. It's to make sure that you leave informed, educated, that you can educate other people, because there's a very, very, very important vote coming up on November 7th. You'll go to the polls and you'll vote like any other day that you vote. And this is probably a very, very active crowd, right? So you'll go to the poll, but make sure that you flip your ballot, because on the back, there are a few questions. There are 3 ballot proposals. The one we're talking about tonight is whether or not there shall be a constitutional convention. And the New York State Constitution has language in it that says, every 20 years, the people shall be asked a question as to whether or not they want a constitutional convention. And the framers of our Constitution, our federal Constitution, they got that part right? We have some questions and some concerns about the Electoral College or some other things that exist, right? But that one piece, the people shall be posed the question of whether or not there is a constitutional convention, is properly placed. We enjoy a representative democracy until there are times where we're just overwhelmingly dissatisfied with our state legislature. No offense to that body, I worked in that body, so I do know that body. But this is the opportunity for people to say just how frustrated and dissatisfied they are, whether or not they want to take control and have it in their own hands, decide what's going to be enshrined in the most important document that we have that governs New York. Since 1777, there have only been 9 constitutional questions presented. There have been 9 conventions. And of those conventions, only a handful of them have actually resulted in changes to the Constitution. The last such was 1964, I believe. 67. Thank you. 1967. And there were some remarkable things achieved at that time. You had to remember the history of the country, what was going on at that time. There was a Bill of Rights. There were suffrage provisions put in. People of color got a chance to actually be fully enfranchised, meaning got a chance to really have the right to vote. There were freedom for expression of religion was added to our Constitution. The age for voting was reduced at that time. There were a lot of things put into place at that time. However, it was one bill that was proposed. Nowadays, we call it the Big Ugly, right? When the New York State Legislature puts one big package together and presents it to their body to vote on, and usually they vote yes on it because it has so many important things in it, so many budget items in it, so many things that impact education, so many things that impact our parks, our libraries, our criminal justice, everything you can think of. They put it in this one bill and they call it Big Ugly. Well, they tried that then, but the people, once the convention created this Big Ugly, the people voted it down. They said, no, we're really not satisfied, and we're not going to go for that. We're not going to do it, right? And so here we are, posed again with the question of having a constitutional convention. There are a couple of things that I want to talk to you about, which maybe will inspire you if the question goes up, meaning if people vote yes for it. I've told you about the difficulties in having a convention. If people vote no, simple majority throughout the entire state. If people vote no on November 7th, we don't have a constitutional convention. Nothing left to talk about for another 20 years unless the legislature poses amendments that you can see on the ballot from time to time, right? But a couple of notes of interest, at least I find fascinating. Women and their representation at the Constitutional Convention has always, women have always been underrepresented, grossly underrepresented. Right, Cordell, maybe not surprised, right? But that has an impact on the kinds of policy pieces that are discussed. That has an impact on the day-to-day lives of families. One of the issues that the legislature is battling with is the women's 10-point agenda. And there's one piece that keeps getting stuck. That's codifying Roe v. Wade, right? A woman's right to an abortion. And so that could be an issue that will come up at the Constitutional Convention to be enshrined to some degree in our Constitution. Could be, maybe not, right? We have the discussion of parkland that, and they're going to go into all of this stuff in detail probably. I don't want to take up too much of what it is that you're supposed to do and get sidetracked, because I really love this. I'm excited about it. You guys, I hope, get excited about it. I'm excited about it.
I'm excited.
Good. Good. Yes, Constitution, right?
Wow.
Let's go to delegates. I'm sorry, Barry, I'm wrap up right now. So with delegates, the Constitutional Convention would be comprised of 204 delegates, right? There would be 3 delegates elected from each Senate district. This is if it gets voted up. Again, if you leave here today impressed enough or dissatisfied enough to vote up. 204 delegates, 3 elected from each Senate district. They run just like anyone else does run for Senate. They need 1,000 signatures to collect on a petition. They submit that, and with that, they run. They're placed on the ballot, and maybe they win, and they become a delegate. So that's 3 from each district. And then there are 15 that run statewide. And their threshold is a little bit higher of how many petitions they have to get, how many signatures they have to get, and where they have to get them from. Okay. And so those of you who live here in this community would have about 2 or 3 different Senate districts if you were interested in running or interested in supporting a candidate who was running, right? It becomes a regular election process. There's fundraising that happens to run for the office of delegate. Those delegates, if they're successful and when they get paid for their time, it is about a 6-month window. They will start April 9th, I believe, and they'll run about 6 months, 4 to 6 months or so, to deliberate and come up with some proposals. The convention has staff members that they hire in order to help them do their work. They get paid the same amount assembly members get paid, right? That number is 79,500. That number is also set by the Constitution, right? And so that might be an issue that comes up if there is a convention. I'm not going to go into the issues. They'll go into the issues that come up. And so, given the fact that women have been woefully underrepresented, and we currently have women woefully underrepresented in our city government, right? These recent elections didn't fare so well for women in different places. If there is, and I'm taking a personal privilege because I have the microphone right now, if there is an opportunity for a constitutional convention and for delegates to run, I would strongly encourage the women of this community and other communities to step forward, be assertive in trying to gain those positions and those seats. So, with that being said, I think I've said enough, and turn it over. Okay, process step by step. So November 7th, the ballot proposal will be on the back of your ballot, the con question, right? Flip it over. If there's a yes, then November 6th of next year, 2018, the voters will vote for the delegates. That's the process that I was just explaining. After that, after those delegates are elected, April of 2019, the delegates and the convention opens, and they start their business of hearings, and review, testimony, analysis. They start to deliberate to come up with proposals, and they negotiate. At that point, there's the recommendations are put before the people in the November 2019 election. So again, it'll be on the back of the ballot, likely, right? People will then vote yes for it, simple majority. This really is an exercise, the purest exercise in democracy that one can think of. People vote yes for it if they want it. If they don't, they vote it down. The last vote for constitutional, I believe it was the last, not the last, but in 1977, the question of having a constitutional convention was rejected. 1.6 to 1.1 million people, right? And so that is a relatively small number in relation to the population that we have in New York State. It is critical that we educate one another because this is a very, very, very important period in New York's history. We're all privileged to be a part of it, even if we vote no or you vote yes. Just make sure you vote. Thank you.
All right, Mr. Al Benninghoff.
Okay. Hey, everybody. Can I stand? Is that cool?
Yes.
Yeah? All right. I'm feeling the spirit, so I'm going to stand up. Thank you. So, I've been doing this for a while, and I'm a political nerd, I got to admit. So I get excited when it's election season. It's election season, everybody. because I feel like everybody else starts to pay attention to things that I've been paying attention to for lots of months. And I get to do things like this where I stand up and tell people about it. So thank you for this. For those of you that don't recognize me, so my name's Al Benninghoff, and I have a little bit of a history in Manhattan. I was the president of Manhattan Young Democrats for a while, where we did a whole bunch of stuff. Thank you. We got some people, see? I worked for the New York State Democratic Party for a while. I was the 5th person hired by the Obama campaign in New York. And we did some pretty cool things during that period of time. And I'm back now, and I'm here trying to fight for a constitutional convention because one of the things that I kept running into was this terrible, terrible, broken, and corrupt government that we have, unfortunately. And so this is talk a little bit about some of the statistics and some of the procedures and outline a little bit of the reasons, frankly, that I support constitutional convention and why I think all of you should too. So there have been 30 elected officials at the state level who've gone to jail over the last 10 years. 30. 30 is a lot, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, bad. Most of them have been convicted and have gone to jail, frankly, because we had a really good U.S. attorney, Preet Bharara, who was just prosecuting all a bunch of people.
Good.
Yeah, except that he's been fired by Donald Trump. We don't really have him anymore. Bad, yeah, good, bad. There are a couple of ethics enforcement mechanisms that we have at the state level. None of them really seem to be functioning that well. The state Senate Ethics Committee met for the first time in 8 years this past year. First time in 8 years. The person who was chairing it, I think, was Senator Diane Savino. She had to interrupt one of the senators who was going off talking, and he had to say, "Madam Chair, I got to get this in because I don't know when this committee's going to meet again." 8 years. There's an assembly ethics body, and just recently the person they had appointed to head that, this great superstar ethics person from Colorado who came in and was going to clean up Albany, and she spent about a year in her post and then left. Citing, frankly, and these are her words, not mine, that Albany just doesn't want to change. And there's an element of truth to that. And frankly, that's why we need a constitutional convention. Fundamentally, what a constitutional convention is an acknowledgement that we want to have a meeting. We want to have a meeting of some folks, talk about our Constitution and the problems with it, and recommend changes to us that we then get to vote on. And if we like the changes that they propose, great, we'll say yes to those changes and they'll become our laws. And if we don't like them, then we say no and it won't become our law. Fundamentally, that's democracy.
Right.
Right?
Yes. Yes, it is.
Right now, that's not what we have. And here's why. I just mentioned 30 elected officials have gone to jail for the last 10 years, and I know, I just beat that drum twice. That's a problem. It's a problem because they got elected in the first place, but it's a problem also because they continue to get elected. That's bad. And it's not that they were ever in jeopardy, but they're elected officials making decisions on our laws, and frankly, a lot of them were convicted because they were corrupt. They were patting their own pockets or steering money to their own families. And that's money that then doesn't come to us, so that we can do things like improve our community, so that we can do things like make our judicial system more effective or fair, so that we can do things like afford more police officers, or afford more teachers, or afford more of anything, frankly, that we need, that we're not getting enough of right now. It's a problem. But it's a problem that's not going to change, and here's why. The way that our state government is set up is terrible. I just mentioned the ethics enforcement officer that left, but it's terrible in this regard. We have a 98% incumbency rate in New York State. And I just mentioned 30 elected officials who went to jail. Here's another shocking statistic. In New York, an elected official, a state legislator, is more likely to go to jail than they are to lose an election in New York. That's a problem. It's a problem for democracy. Because when things like that start to happen, people start to lose faith that democracy works. And I hear a lot about it. One problem causes another problem, causes another problem. Here's getting to the root of the cause, right? Part of our laws in not only ethics enforcement, but in the financial element of the whole thing, campaign finance reform, which you hear people beat the drum on, but here's the fact of the matter and why it hurts. In New York, an individual is capped on how much they can give to a candidate, right? Sounds fair. Companies can actually give to candidates in New York. Most people don't know that. but they can't. They're capped on how much they can give. But here's the weird quirk. An individual is not capped on how many companies they can make. So you can see the problem. An individual can create an infinite number of LLCs and funnel all kinds of money, as long as each individual LLC is giving under the minimum donation, however much they want to an individual candidate. It's a campaign finance donation loophole big enough to drive a truck through. Welcome to New York. Yes, I'm so sorry. I'll talk for a long time on this, Steve.
You're
So
talking
elected
very
officials-
good stuff.
Thank you. Okay, our elected officials can take an almost unlimited amount of campaign finance donations. More have gone to jail than have lost elections over the last 10 years. They're more accountable, frankly, to the legislative leaders than they are to you, because they get all of their money to the legislative leaders. Committee appointments that they get, which directly affect their paychecks, those Lulus that you hear about, campaign chairman, committee chairmanships. And frankly, the amount of staff or resources they use as elected officials are all determined by the leadership. And if they want to advocate for a bill, and they happen to not be a chairman, or even if they are a chairman, it never has to come out of committee because the legislative leaders never have to let it come out of the committee. So then the body as a whole never gets to vote on it. And then we never get to see how our elected official is voting on the things that we care about. So they get to come to the communities and tell us that they fought for the thing that we asked for them to fight for, and then they get to go back to their campaign donors or to the chairs of their legislature.
Yes.
Get to say, yeah, get to say no. You know, I've now thrown off my topic and my time's up. That is a real problem. The people wrote our laws and wrote our Constitution a whole long time ago, included this provision specifically, this Constitutional Convention provision, specifically so that the people had an opportunity every 20 years to keep the legislature in check, so that they didn't amass too much power, and so that we, the people of New York, could hold them accountable. They're scared now, and they're going to frighten you with a whole bunch of fear-mongering, which sounds like a tactic that's used by the other side a lot. But they're going to try and scare you. Don't let them. Thank you.
Thank you, Al. And we're going to turn it over to one of our con speakers right now, Mr. Bragg. And you have a rather stretchy 5 minutes to make your opening remarks.
Hello? Okay, there we go. So thank you. Good evening, brothers and sisters. I'm Kyle Bragg. I'm Secretary-Treasurer of SA32BJ. We represent about 160,000 members across the East Coast, 80,000 of them who live right here within New York State. So I'd start by saying that the Constitutional Convention, I believe, is a flawed process. This is a very, not only flawed, but very expensive process. As my sister mentioned, it was 1967 since the last one, and you know they call it the Big Ugly, where they went through this entire process to be voted down. Part of this is that they can bring out of committees any number of proposals to add to the ballot, or they can bundle them. And so bundling them, you can have a bunch of proposal amendments that end up being voted down after we spend billions of dollars through an entire process that has no end date. It could go on and go on and go on. And so that's one problem. Staying in my lane, talking for my brothers and sisters in labor, we are very concerned, and we believe that the risks outweigh the rewards. We don't want to put, the future of union labor, especially civil servants, in the hands of people who can be influenced by special interests like the Koch brothers who can come in. He explained the process. He said, right, and that's the process that we have to go through. He said that they can come in and they can put all these LLCs and put together this money to run candidates. So if you're running in a system that is already designed and already structured for working people not to win, then you talk about the influence of all this money coming into our state to hijack our process. And so as you elect delegates, all this money can be poured in to make sure that their delegates are in this Constitutional Convention and that they drive an agenda that's not friendly to the working families of this state. And so actually the opportunity to influence is great and at great risk. He talked about campaign finance reform. Yeah, I agree we need campaign finance law. Labor agrees we need campaign finance laws because we want to see average everyday citizens have the opportunity to run for office. But this can be done through referendum. We don't have to risk our entire rights under this Constitution by bundling it into amendments that can come out of a constitutional convention. There are referendums that hit the ballot all the time. And so what we need to do is focus on those things that we need to correct to make sure that power continues to lie in the hands of the people. The framers of the Constitution, National Constitution, was very concerned in the beginning about whether or not the government had the most power or the state had the most power. And that was a subject of big debate as they were framing the Constitution. And we're concerned now that we don't want to lose the power that we have right now in this state by willy-nilly going through a process, again, that can go on forever, no control over the process, who gets elected, how they get elected, what concerns, who's the people that are backing the delegates who are going up to make these decisions. Another major concern that I have in particular is that communities of color could be really left out of this in a big way. It could be really, really devastating to communities of color because if you talk about how the process works and who gets elected, we're talking across the state, and we can be really marginalized in this process. And so if you look at the senatorial districts, if you get 3 votes out of every senatorial district, it could end up that community colors get woefully underrepresented in a constitutional convention. That would not be good. And so there are many other concerns. I don't want to put my public education funding at risk. That could happen. We don't want to do that. We want to make sure we have a strong, viable public education system that remains public. The state constitution provides for rights that even go beyond our U.S. Constitution. And so I'm not willing to gamble those rights away in a constitutional convention when I know that there are powerful players who can come in and try to hijack this process and turn around many rights that we have fought for and achieved in the state to expand voting rights for folks, and that can be subject to contestation. Did I say it right? I'm tongue-tied. But that can be subject also to roll back voting rights. We need to expand voting rights, and we want to make sure more people are included. A lot of this can be done through referendums as well. I personally believe that felons, once you've done your time, you should be able to come out and vote. I don't need a constitutional convention to do that. Let's put a referendum up and make sure that people come back who've served their time, come back and have the right to vote. We don't need a constitutional convention that we throw everything to the wind in order to bring equal rights to all New York states. So I'll wrap it up. Thank you. And I firmly speak for my organization, my 80,000 members here, and other labor leaders in the city say that we vote no.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bragg. A quick reminder before we go on to our final 2 panelists for their opening remarks. If you have questions, we can get you an index card or post-it note with pens. They're in the aisle there, and then our ushers will be around to pick them up and bring them up here for me. That will inform the second part of our panel discussion, which will be Q&A and a moderated discussion. So now I'd like to turn it back over to Ms. Minister Jazz from the New York People's Convention for her opening remarks.
Yay!
Thank you for that. I want to say thank you for allowing me to be here, and I'm going to take a selfish moment because I have the microphone in my hand.
Be selfish.
And thank you. And I'm going to say, because we only have about, 12 more days left until the 7th, I want to say thank you to Al. In June, I met with Al really briefly, and I came in, I was excited about this opportunity because I saw it as a way to affect policy for students that I've been working with. And I presented him with what I would do, And based on evidence and what's on paper, I wasn't qualified for the job. But because of my vision and the way that I presented that, I'm here before you. So I want to say thank you so much, Al, for believing in me. And I want to say thank you for believing in the process. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about why I'm so bold about this process. So you have to understand that I am the daughter of a blind minister. She went and took herself through theology school. I watched my mother lose her vision when I was 13 years old, yet still take herself through a master's degree program, become a minister, and then travel the world with very limited sight. She is legally blind. That is my mother. My mother taught me the essence of courage and faith. So I come before you today because I know that with God, we are always in the majority. My opponents would like to tell you that it is not the time because we are minorities. They would like to tell you that it is not the time because we are disenfranchised. But I don't understand being disenfranchised and not doing something because we're disenfranchised. So I want to challenge and push back on that for a little bit. And I stand before you today because I am reminded of the story of David. And my mother told me to always remember the story of David and how David, with the very tools that he had in his hands, defeated the giants that we like to call the Trump administration. Right now, we see the giants. We call them special interests, we call them dark money, but we definitely can see the giants. But it is up to us to understand what true power is and where that power lies. My opponents will ask you to travel back to 1967. They will say, look who dominated the delegate space at that time. But that just tells me that they don't understand change. Because it's not 1967 anymore.
2017.
Hello? My opponents will say that we don't have the money to stand up to the powers that be, but clearly they did not have a praying grandmother that took care of all of her children on a very seamstress budget. Hey, that's okay. I know all things are possible. My opponents will tend to call me naive for sharing a vision of possibility tonight, but they forgot that I know the power of what it means to dream. And I have the right to dream, just like MLK did in 1960. Engraved in my spirit is the cleverness and the faith of David. And as he took up those tools, he looked the giant center and pulled back the sling. And to me, the sling is the Constitutional Convention. I saw this as an opportunity for us to actually step up to the plate, to show our faith, to exercise that, and do what it is that we need to do in order to show up and show out like I know that we can. My mother would say to the naysayers, "O ye of little faith." But it's okay, I understand, because they've been telling you to hide this tool from us since 1977. So it's been about 40 years, and we've been patiently waiting. But I say, wait no more. Now is the time is right, and the time is ripe. Why should we wait? Should we wait till our children complete the school to prison pipeline? No.
There you go.
Should we wait until our waters are full of lead?
There you go.
No. Should we wait till we are pushed out of our homes from gentrification and then say have a convention? No. Should we wait until the suicide rate of our colored little girls and boys increases? I say no. I say now is the time is right. Harriet Tubman did not wait permission.
That's right.
Martin Luther King Jr. didn't ask the experts if it was time to march.
That's right.
We have to remember who we are and where we come from.
We're not
and
waiting.
that on November 7th, we're going to vote yes,
Yes.
because we're voting for ourselves.
That's
this
right.
is our opportunity, and the time is now. And I say thank you very much for your support.
Vote yes.
All right, and we have our closing speaker, who
Seizing the moment.
will give his own introduction, but Mr. Jordan Marks from New Yorkers Against Corruption.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. Thank you for having us tonight. I'm Jordan Marks. I run the group called New Yorkers Against Corruption. It's about 150 organizations and growing across the state of New York that oppose the Constitutional Convention, and it's everybody. It's not partisan, it's bipartisan, it's not ideological. It's everybody from the ACLU. It is groups that care about it's labor. It's the Conservative Party on one hand. As I say, the ACLU is with us. They never agree with the Conservative Party on anything, but on this, they're opposed. It's Planned Parenthood. It's NAACP opposes the Constitutional Convention. Make the Road, groups that care about New Yorkers' communities for change. You name it, across the state. It's a growing list of groups that oppose the Constitutional Convention, and they oppose it for two reasons, really. There's two main reasons that are very concerning to everybody. One is the process, which you've heard a lot about, and I'll just say a few words about it, and then what's at stake. So the process is such a mess. You heard tonight that 3 delegates are elected by state senatorial district. Well, who gets elected? It's the state senator. It's the state senator's family. They make $80,000 a year as a delegate and $80,000 a year as a state senator also. In 67, and I am going to point back, in 67, the last time there was a constitutional convention, 80% of the delegates were politicians and lobbyists. That's who gets elected. That is who gets elected. It's politicians and lobbyists. So the danger here is one, if you think Albany's a mess, and all of us do, we're depending upon the same people to fix it, only on hyperdrive. So that's one challenge. And that's also where you start seeing, I think, money coming in. If there's a delegate race, you'll see money from all over the place, I think, coming into New York to try to reframe the Constitution. Then there's the lobbying and the whining and dining of these delegates. And then ultimately, as we're referred, there are going to be statewide campaigns. And it sounds like that could be great for democracy. But, given this last election and what's at stake, I heard a lot of believe me. Well, believe me, we are screwed, by the administration in Washington. Elections have consequences and they're dangerous. And when you have outside money coming in to influence elections, and New York is a very big, expensive state, as you know, then the outcomes can be skewed. Of course, we trust the voters at the end of the day if it's fair. But if it's rigged, if there's money that comes in from all over the place against our very interests, it's not a fair election at that point. So I think the process is a problem. That's number one. And that's why all of these groups have come out to oppose the Constitutional Convention. But the other part is what's at risk. In a national environment where everything seems upside down, our state constitution in New York, which has stronger protections, as you've heard, than the federal government, is all that protects us. It is literally the document that protects our very rights and values. So it's why the environmental groups, the Sierra clubs that care about clean air and clean water and the health of our families. It's why working men and women who are the people who clean the streets and who are healthcare workers are deeply concerned about this. Everything is at risk. We talked a little bit about education funding. That's a part of it. But Planned Parenthood is concerned about reproductive health being at risk. The ACLU is concerned not only that all these values can be horse traded back and forth at the end of the day. So when you put, voting rights could be at risk, the idea, anything, the worst thing people could say, I think, about when I speak to anybody about this, or any of the growing group that opposes the Constitutional Convention, is that it's like fear-mongering. But when you open the state constitution, literally everything is on the table. Everything becomes a bargaining chip. And so that's the second reason. It's the process is so convoluted and so corruptible, where lobbyists and politicians run everything, and a ton of outside money could come in. So it's the process is so messy, along with everything that our rights and values being at stake.
We need to overthrow the government. Is that messy?
Is that your conclusion?
That's my conclusion.
All right. So there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. The sound and the fury of the very passionate opening arguments for and against a New York State Constitutional Convention, which is the question on the ballot before us November 7th. As a quick reminder, I'm Barry Weinberg. I'm the president of the West Harlem Progressive Democratic Club. We are in West Harlem, and one of the things we do in West Harlem is we make sure that we give everything a very thorough and fair discussion, education, and really rake over the issue. And I would also like to acknowledge that we are in a Baptist sanctuary, and I have never heard of a short meeting in a Baptist sanctuary, so we are really going to dig into these issues. So, I would like to really ask the panelists to help us get a sense of the stake of this question. And I'd like to ask the pro panelists their top 3 things that they would like to see changed in the New York State Constitution, short answers. And I would like to ask the con side the top 3 things they believe need to be protected that currently exist in the state constitution. So can we start with Ms. Minister Jazz in the now?
So I wanted to push back a little bit on your question, because it seems like it sets it up as if because we want things to change, we don't want things to be protected, and that's not the case. And I want to talk about the process a little bit, because what keeps being left off is the end of the process. And at the end of the process, all of those questions do come before the people. And it is correct, in 1967 they made a mistake, but we learn from our mistakes, don't we?
Right.
And as the women represent in the delegate space, I'm sure we ain't gonna make that mistake again. In 1938, they did something good. They presented all of the amendments in 9 different bundles, and the people got to vote them up or down. And I believe strongly that the process isn't as flawed as Jordan would like you to believe. We know how to use the process and the tools to our advantage when we use creativity and intelligence. And we all are very intelligent. So one of the things that I would like to see happen in the Constitutional Convention is a equitable and fair funding. So right now, public schools exist there. It is guaranteed that you have the right to public education. I would like to see that expanded and it quantified so that there is a equitable and fair education that people have, right? Because we need that in order to level the playing field. I'm going to pass the mic to Al, and he can say 2 more.
Okay. All right, yeah, so 2 more things we'd like to see change.
Judicial?
Well, so for instance, there's a lot. There's a lot of problems with our current constitution. It has been updated a very long time. And to push back on the question again, there's been a lot of talk about how the terrible process is, and it's hilarious to me to listen to because the process is supposed to be so terrible for electing delegates. It's exactly the same process we have the current elected officials. They're in charge of all the laws, so somehow that same bad process gets us great things. Why couldn't it get us great delegates? Or that same process gets us, it's bad. Anyway, so 2 other things that I'd like to see change in the Constitution, frankly, that are not now, and Jordan's absolutely right in that the state constitution is supposed to expand upon what our federal constitution does. And you are a little bit right in that we are experiencing right now a very aggressive, we'll call it aggressive federal government that is stripping away funding from the EPA and is talking about at least stripping away rights that a lot of communities enjoy. And you would think that in New York, which is the 2nd most progressive state in the country, we would have state-level protections that would be in place that would protect us if suddenly these things came away, but we don't. We don't, because our Constitution has been updated in a very long time, and lots has happened.
So what would you put in?
So I would put in a right to clean air and clean water, which we don't currently have in our state constitution, so that if the EPA did get underfunded or defunded, that at least at the state level, if people had polluted water or air, we could do something about it, as opposed to just shrugging our shoulders, which is what happened to those poor people in Hoosick Falls in New York just last year. The other thing that I would put in is, frankly, equal protections for all. We don't have that expressly stated in our state constitution, and it needs to be there. Women are not protected. LGBT people are not protected. Immigrants are not protected. Disabled are not, frankly, recognized equally. There's a lot, frankly, that we could expand upon in our state constitution that is woefully inadequate right now.
Got it. And then I would like to turn it over to the con side. What would you like to see that's in the state constitution that you worry could be lost should it be opened up to a convention?
Just one for short, I would say is there's a title in the Constitution that protects care of our needy. That is fundamental, I think, to our most vulnerable citizens. It's like the government has a responsibility to educate our children for sure, but also when government is at its best, we're protecting our most vulnerable citizens. That is one major concern, I think, if a constitutional convention is open.
Yes, and we're very concerned with the loss of collective bargaining and pensions for civil servants, which would be a devastating impact on our community. And women's reproductive rights. We don't want to play with that.
What was that,
So,
sir?
no. Oh, sorry, Jordan, yeah.
I was just going to say, just to add to that, on the premise of the question, everything is at risk. So these are the top three, but like one of the reasons, and you'll hear this, that New York is a very progressive state. So if you care about women's access to reproductive health, that no one should worry, because New York's such a progressive state that it can be that we're never going to touch women's rights. But there's a reason why, like Planned Parenthood and National Institute of Reproductive Health firmly oppose a constitutional convention. It's because not only are they afraid that the rights of women could be infringed, they're also just worried about being a bargaining chip. I mean, it ends up being this big game, this big political game by these politicians and lobbyists, and that is what's scary for everybody.
So, thank you for giving us a little bit more clarity beyond the generalities about what is at stake or what we could gain should a constitutional convention happen. I want to now really dig in a little deeper into some of the questions that's coming up just in the next several weeks. We have a question here about what sort of outreach is being done to make people aware of this on both ends. And so if one person from each side could just very briefly give an overview of if they think that people know about this question and this convention process and what they're doing to make sure that people make an informed decision on November 7th. And we'll start with the pro side this time. I'm sorry, the con side this time.
Well, I know that in the labor movement, we're taking every effort to engage our members on this issue, make sure that they understand what the issue is and what's at risk. And so there's a lot of resources being spent to inform the labor population of this city and state. We have, great elected leaders who are doing events like this, that are putting together these town halls, informative meetings that give citizens the opportunity to both understand and engage in a dialogue about the Constitutional Convention, both pros and cons. And so it's happening around the city. It's happening here in Harlem, it's happening in the Bronx, it's happening in Brooklyn, it's happening in Queens. So there is an effort to raise the consciousness about the Constitutional Convention and make sure not only raise the consciousness or to influence people, but to make sure that they understand what the Constitutional Convention is, what it can do, the process, and how the process will have impact on them and their families and their communities. There's so much money that will be poured into this process, which could be going to other to resource other important, valuable services in this state.
We have to take chances.
And the pro side?
Judicial reform.
Yeah. So, I'm seeing a lot of stuff that you guys are doing. Frankly, we're being massively outspent. The yes side is the underdog.
Exactly.
We're being outspent 5-1,
We get
and
this
I've heard a lot put out, and you've probably all seen it. Who's seen the vote no either lawn signs or internet ads?
Yeah, right.
Or
This all this kind of stuff.
Oh yeah,
TV
the
ads,
stuff that's getting mailed.
all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. They're doing a lot to get the message out because they have a lot of
Yeah,
money
they
to
got the
spend.
money.
So
They
they're
got the corrupt.
they're putting
To our members.
forward
We
their
only
stuff.
do it to our members.
No, they have $1.5 million. So far publicly disclosed that they've raised and that they're spending on cool stuff like the thing they just announced, they're spending $1 million on TV ads across the state.
Billions of dollars.
There's we want to talk about the money that's come into the election, and let's talk about the money that's come into this fight.
Come on, man, it gets real.
What we are trying to do to turn people out is to frankly have small discussions amongst communities like this. Where we have, frankly, discussions not only about the potential of a constitutional convention, but not only have discussions about, I'll repeat myself, not only have discussions about the potential of a Constitutional Convention, but inform people about the process, not only about the Constitutional Convention, but why New York's government, frankly, is currently broken. And why there's a lot of talk about all of these reforms that can come through the legislative, the other amendment process that we have for the Constitution, which has to go through the legislature that I just discussed was broken. Are we going to beg our legislator to let us have these reforms, or are we going to do it ourselves?
That's right, do it ourselves.
I'm going to say, so I am the digital director of the New York People's Convention, and I am doing my very best to use social media to reach out to everyone. I'm making a great progress, but like I said, it's like a team of two right now because our funding isn't so strong. So I really could use all of the support of anyone that would like to join me in the last moment's effort over the next 12 days to support me in pushing it out on social media in order to get the word out about the convention.
So I want to actually touch on something that has kind of come up now from both sides, pro and con, which is the amendment process. So there are two other proposals on the ballot, which I believe are sort of reaching the end of this amendment process. And the pro-Constitutional Convention side has expressed dissatisfaction with that process. The con side has pointed that out to us, pointing out you can amend the Constitution bit by bit through this amendment and referendum process. And can you begin maybe with the con side by giving us a little bit of background about how many times has the amendment process been used historically, and then and why do you think that that's effective and will bring about the change that people think we need?
They don't have an answer.
Can I specifically tell you how many times the referendum has been used to try to change the amendments in the state? No, I can't tell you, but I know that it happens, right? And so, how many times have there's been an attempt to put term limits on? The people of the state speak to it. Either they want it or they don't want it, and people have the opportunity to talk to it. So I'm thinking there's somewhere around 200 times. So I mean, there are many referendums, and that's the way that right now citizens have the opportunity to engage in election process and amendment process. They get to vote, and each vote counts. And it's not, and that's each citizen. It's not a delegate system of citizens who are elected in a really shady process that can be influenced by big money and people who are not within the state of New York. Big money that comes from outside the state of New York. The referendum, we think the referendum, the political system is not perfect. It hasn't been perfect for many years. The national system is not perfect, and the state system is not perfect. But the citizens have a voice, they have a vote. That's a powerful tool, the vote. And they can vote on referendums. And so if the referendums are up and they get to vote, whether it passes or doesn't pass, someone's going to be unhappy. But the point is, people had the opportunity to exercise their right to vote on it. And the problem in this country really is the lack of voting participation. It's horrible in the United States. And so we have to figure out how we get more people to the ballot, and then maybe we can really facilitate real change both in this country and this state. So the issue is, how do you get people to the ballot, not the Constitutional Convention.
And Jordan, do you have anything to add to that? All right, and so for the pro side, we have, again, two amendments on the ballot, one of which actually is a provision that would strip state lawmakers of their pensions if they are convicted of committing malfeasance using their office, which would seem to probably not be appealing to many state legislators, but it's on the ballot anyway. So is the amendment process enough, or do we need a constitutional convention to get the changes?